Can we just make a separate?
Thank you very much, Christy. I want to confirm that everybody can see my slide right now.
Yes, we can, Ben.
Oh, perfect. So thank you all for your interest in COVID vaccination and COVID in general. It's hard to believe that it's already been 1 year, actually more than a year, since we've had COVID. One of the things to look at is specifically why is it called a coronavirus? So it's called a coronavirus because in the electron microscope, when you look at the virus, you see these little spikes that look like gems in a crown. And so in Old Greek, it was called a corona. They've been around for a long time. These viruses, I include some of the viruses that cause colds. And some of you may remember the SARS outbreaks back in the early 2000s. That also was a coronavirus. And right here I have sort of like the spike protein. So what are the symptoms if you get COVID? Well, for the vast majority of people, there are no symptoms. So that means you have COVID, you are spreading it, and you don't realize that you have it. If you do have symptoms, the commonest ones are fever, dry cough, and fatigue. Less common are aches and pains, sore throat, diarrhea, pink eye, loss of smell, or headaches. And of course, the serious ones are the ones that we have to look after. So difficulty breathing or shortness of breath, chest pain or pressure, and then loss of speech, much like a stroke. So why is it that we're so worried? Well, we're actually worried because COVID is a killer disease. This is the initial information that we had. It's from China, where 15% of people over the age of 80 died from COVID. And you can see that as you get younger, the chances of dying go very much lower. This is our numbers, still early on. It's late April 2020, but you sort of see the same type of slope. The reason we have such a high mortality rate in the over 80 age group is because of the very, very frail elderly who are living in long-term care. We are one of the countries where long-term care was hit the hardest. Now there are many more, but that's the reason for us. Of importance, of course, is when you look at the 20 to 30-year-olds, the thing to keep in mind is that the chance of dying is 0.003%. So 300 cases of COVID in a million will end in death in the young population. That 300 is important to remember, and I'll get to it later in the presentation. So why are we looking at a vaccine? Well, the first thing to remember is that prevention is actually much, much better. So physical distancing is important, washing hands is important, wearing a mask, wearing a visor if you can't, if you're working close quarters. All those things are very important. And we know that people have been doing that because influenza this year has been incredibly low. So we've had very few cases of influenza. At the same time, this speaks to how much more contagious COVID is. Not only that, I'd like to remind people that these variants are even more contagious than the regular COVID. So when you can't prevent spread, the next thing is to look at how can we slow down the impact of COVID. So we're using the vaccines. And so vaccine is any kind of substance that can stimulate the production of antibodies, which will provide protection against one or several diseases. So here in Canada, we were blessed with early shipments of mRNA vaccines. So the biggest question is, what is mRNA? Well, the first thing is that it's not DNA. As a matter of fact, DNA actually makes mRNA. The M stands for messenger. And the reason it's a messenger is because it has the recipe for our cells to produce the spike proteins. The spike protein then gets recognized as a foreign protein and is attacked by our body. And that's what we call the immune response. The advantage of the mRNA is that we actually don't have to inject spike proteins. like we do with usual vaccines, because we're producing it ourselves. The mRNA is very fragile, degrades very quickly, and is digested by our cells within hours. This mRNA technology is not new. We've used similar technology to make many of the tests that we use for medical research. A lot of the genetic testing uses mRNA style technology. It's been used for cancer vaccines since 2009. So we've also used it for vaccines. So why should we use mRNA? Again, a reminder, it is not DNA. So mRNA functions much like a production line for making proteins, and in this case, the spike protein. The spike protein gets recognized, and we're making lots of it, gets recognized as a foreign protein and is attacked, and that's our immune response. So a lot of people are sort of worried and say, well, if this is a new type of vaccine, how did it get to be approved so quickly? Well, if you will, everything went right. China released all the information they had on the spike protein early on, and various countries collaborated. That was a first for vaccine development. The drug companies already had mRNA and were already using it, so it was easy to modify. There was a pandemic, there still is. And so it is very easy to see if a vaccine works, because if you don't get the vaccine and you're coming down with diseases with COVID, you don't need to spend a lot of time because everybody is catching it. As a matter of fact, some of the early studies used 40,000 people as part of their study. And while that sounds like a small number, keep in mind that the usual amount of people for testing a new vaccine is in the order of 10 to 15,000. So in a matter of a few months, they were able to get 2 to 3 times more people in the studies than we normally get in routine vaccines. When we use mRNA, our bodies are producing the spike protein instead of the companies and the manufacturing places. So as a result, we don't have to wait for all that manufacturing to occur because we're providing it right away. Some of the things about mRNA that the companies are now looking at is how to keep it to be more stable or less fragile at more regular temperatures. They were so keen on getting it out and helping people that they did not look at stabilizing it, except under their conditions. So that's why the Pfizer initially had to be kept at minus 70 degrees and why Moderna still needs to be at minus 20. And once it's at room temperature, these two vaccines, I should say, have a very short shelf life, approximately hours. And lastly, the approval process was just as rigorous as before. The only difference is that countries were doing it differently. The way it was done before 2020 is that the approval bodies would wait until every last piece of information was brought in, and then they would review the information. The countries, this time around, reviewed the information coming in as it came in. So imagine that you're a bricklayer and you want to build your house, but you do not start building that house until you have every brick shipped. But the bricks aren't coming all at once. They're coming in weekly shipments. Versus your friend, the other bricklayer, who starts laying his bricks and as they come in. So of course the house is going to be finished sooner if you do it that way. Do the vaccines work? The short answer is yes. This is information from Pfizer, and Moderna mimics it. We don't have fancy graphs for like this one for AstraZeneca, but it is also very much similar to this. What you notice is that you start getting protection at day 10 to 14, the 2 weeks. What you also notice is that there is essentially a very big flattening of people catching COVID for those who have been vaccinated. Those who have not been vaccinated continue to catch COVID at a very similar rate. I was mentioning about the 40,000 people, And so the blue dots on the left are people who got the vaccine, and the gray dots are the people who did not get the vaccine. And this was done in, these people lived in the US, in Germany, Turkey, South Africa, and other countries. This little red dot represents 8 people. So of the people who got vaccines, only 8 out of 20,000 got symptoms, got sick with COVID. Those who did not get vaccines, 160 got severely ill. So who should not get the vaccine? Well, if you've had anaphylaxis after any vaccine, you should probably be careful with this one. And if for those of you who don't know what anaphylaxis is, then you probably don't have it. But basically, if you have an EpiPen, rather than waiting the usual 15 minutes as is required, you'll be asked to stay for 30 minutes in the event that there is an adverse reaction. For your second dose, if you had an immediate or anaphylactic reaction during your first vaccination, you should not get the second. And then lastly, anybody with an infection, whether it's COVID or not, should delay the vaccination. The reason for that is primarily because if you're fighting off another infection, then your response to the vaccine will not be as good. And that is why people prefer to delay other vaccinations so that there are no vaccines 2 weeks before your COVID shot and nothing 2 weeks after. You should be cautious if you're on medications that can decrease your immune system. Now, the reason you should be cautious is simply because you are actually at the highest risk of getting COVID illnesses that require hospitalization. So cautious means ask us a question or ask your rheumatologist or the specialist that's given you that medication that decreases your immune system. And for the overwhelming majority of cases, the answer will be you should get the vaccine, but not every, so you do need to ask. And you should be cautious if you're on blood thinners because you're getting an injection and the risk of bleeding is a little bit higher because of that. Very common reactions, but roughly 10% or so, pain, headache, feeling a little bit tired and achy. Less common is redness and swelling at the injection site, and very rare are serious allergic reactions such as anaphylaxis. In the Pfizer vaccine, there's a specific question about polyethylene glycol. What is PEG? So PEG is used as a laxative. It's used in some intravenous medications, and it's used in many cosmetic creams. And the allergy rate to PEG is roughly 1 in 200,000. You also see it in extra strength Tylenol, some Advil liquid gels, and a whole bunch of other over-the-counter medications. So it is quite common, and a lot of people have been exposed to PEG. Now, I've been talking about the mRNA vaccine, and AstraZeneca is what we call a viral vector. So it's a little bit different. In this case, a common cold virus that has been modified to give 0 symptoms is now modified one more time so that it tells our body to produce spike proteins. So it's working in the same fashion, essentially, as the mRNA vaccine, but through innocuous virus. This type of vaccine has been used for rare conditions. And so the Zika virus and the Ebola virus, the vaccines developed to fight them come from a viral vector. You've heard in the news about clotting with AstraZeneca. The chances of clotting occurring is 1 in a million to 1 in 2 million based on the doses given. This is a new finding, and the reason it's a new finding is because the risk of developing clots on your own without a vaccine are in the similar range. So if you're 20 to 29 and you have a 1 in a million chance of getting a clot from the vaccine, remember that 300 number. If you catch COVID, you have 300 times the chance of dying from COVID than you do from dying of this very rare clotting. But it is real. We have not seen it in people over the age of 50. We're not quite sure how it happens, but we know that people who have been on heparin have had a similar effect with that particular blood thinner. And we also know that people who catch COVID have a higher chance of clotting. So the key message is the vaccines are all extremely similar, okay? They are all 100% effective at keeping people out of the hospital. So mortality rate is reduced, severe disease is reduced, and the side effect profile of the vaccines is somewhere between getting your flu shot and the shingles shot. When we hear on the news of the various effectiveness, the way it is reported is a little bit misleading. Remember that graph, those dots, those are the people who had COVID and developed serious side effects, right? So with Moderna and with Pfizer, 95 times out of 100, you will not get serious side effects. And 5 times out of 100, you will get serious side effects from COVID. And close to 0 out of 100 will land in the hospital. With AstraZeneca, it's not quite as good at getting rid of the symptoms, but it is just as good at keeping you out of a hospital. So instead of having 95% of people fight off what seems to be a cold or just the sniffles, with the AstraZeneca vaccine, 65% feel that way. And 35% of people will get symptoms from COVID after being vaccinated if they catch it. So which vaccine is the best? The best vaccine is the first available vaccine. So again, if you go to the Center for Effective Practice, you'll see that the vaccines are highlighted at a glance in a nice fashion. The Janssen from Johnson & Johnson, while having been approved in Canada, is still not available. Keep in mind that the hospitalization prevention is a little bit lower. Okay. All right, so that's it for the medical side of things. I'll stop sharing. Or
keep sharing.
okay.
I just don't have access to your slides, so you can just display what's on that one.
All right.
So this is for before getting your vaccine. So once you've booked your vaccine, so whether it be with the clinic or with one of the city sites or at the hospital or a pharmacy, these are just some pro tips basically on how to prepare yourself. So all of them are going to require to complete a consent form. So you'll want to do that beforehand. So show up with a completed consent form and ask any and all questions you can prior to arriving at your appointment. Review the clinic flow. So for the clinic, there will be, once the clinics are launched and ready, there will be a clinic flow. And basically what that means is a directional flow of traffic, how to sign in to get your vaccine, which way to walk, where to sit after. All of these are things to review prior, and they will be sent in an email. Once the clinics are launched, you'll get an email letting you know how to go about that. And the clinic flow is basically the same. If you are getting a vaccine at a city site as well, they would explain to you how to go about that. All of them will likely give you a what to expect handout. Make sure you read it beforehand just so that you're prepared. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. And then so Greenboro, Christy has been working very hard to get these clinics up and running and everything set and ready to go. So again, just how to be prepared when you get there and when they do come, just so that everything will be seamless. You make sure you have your health card number. You make sure that you arrive masked. in a short sleeve shirt, ready to show your arm so you get the vaccine. No button down shirts or tuxedos. If you've had a COVID vaccination already, proof of your previous vaccination, it really doesn't apply at this time because there's a 4-month, at this time, there's a 4-month delay in between doses. And you enter the clinic alone, so no companions to come inside with you. And just so one of the questions that were asked is, if you're a Quebec patient, are you still able to get your vaccine at the clinic? Yes, you can. You're a patient of the clinic we're taking, you are absolutely most welcome to come and get your vaccine there. This, I think, is...
Well, I sprung that on you, sorry.
Okay. Well, I mean, I assume this is to sign up for your information about COVID-19 vaccines. So Ottawa Public Health has great information on how to keep yourself up to date on the vaccines and the newest information coming out and what the rollout is and so on, who's eligible and where to go.
And again, this was organized before. This is a slide deck I use. So this is just to show you that you can actually sort of book your appointment based on your area, your postal code. This is if you're going with one of the city clinics, many of whom are using the AstraZeneca as well. Okay, so just to answer some of the questions, which I realize I didn't do all of them. So there was some questions about, can I take AstraZeneca if I'm taking medications like blood thinners? Absolutely. You can have any vaccine with that. Basically, this is a vaccine for a new disease, but the vaccine approach is the same. So if you've had flu shots in the past, your tetanus updates and so on, it's exactly the same issue, but it is a vaccine for a new disease. So we don't know much on things, which is why we have a 15-minute observation time. If you have allergies, such as nuts, if they're anaphylactic allergies, we'll ask that you stick around for some time, 30 minutes. Okay. Are there other questions?
There are some other questions here in the chat, Dr. Robert. So one of the most popular ones here is, are there any dangers to at-risk people with heart problems?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the thing to keep in mind is that the virus doesn't care how old you are or what conditions you have. The question is, how well can you fight it off? And so the issue with people who have other diseases like heart conditions, diabetes, even just being older in the older age groups, your ability to fight off COVID seems to be impaired. So you're the person who's going to benefit the most from the vaccines. And so that's why they have come out for the people who are at higher risk of using up hospital beds. Because if you take a city size of 1 million like Ottawa, and you have a 15 to 20% mortality rate in the over 80 age group, we're looking at 30, 40,000 people coming into a hospital all at once. But if they're all between the ages of 20 and 29, it would be only 300 or 500 people going into hospital and 300 people dying. So we want to make sure that people stay out of hospitals. And that's the key behind the vaccine effectiveness. You want to make sure that you get the vaccine that keeps you out of the hospital. And in this case, it's all three that we have right now do exactly the same job. Your immune response might not be as big as somebody who's 25 or 30 years old if you have a heart condition or you're older. But that immune response will protect you anyways against more severe disease from COVID.
That's great, Ben. Thank you. The next one, just a question with respect to the administration of the vaccine. Is there concern if, let's say I got the vaccine and the administrator gave it to me pretty slow, maybe 10 seconds to inject? But my friend to the right also had a vaccine injected, and it was about a 1 to 2 second, injection. Is there a difference? And if this happened to anybody, should they be concerned?
So the speed with which you inject the vaccine should not matter. I do know that both the Moderna and the Pfizer are thicker. So it is harder to push the vaccine through the needle. As well, the size of the needle makes a big difference. So if you have a wider bore needle, the vaccine will come out much more easily than you have a narrow bore. But with a narrow bore, the injection itself hurts a little bit less. I see something here about the Z-track. The Z-track is useful more in people who have bleeding issues. And so what the Z-track essentially means is that you go through the skin, you move the needle, and then you continue pushing. And so that makes it harder to have bruises come from the vaccine, but it does take a little bit longer. Okay, so I see a question. What's the difference? Okay, so right now it looks like all three vaccines work equally well on the UK variant. It also appears as if they work okay-ish against the South African variant. We don't have a lot of information. The AstraZeneca is being looked at against the South African variant, and we'll have more answers on that later.
Dr. Robert, will the COVID-19 vaccine be annual like the influenza vaccine? Do you know?
I do not know. I think a lot of that will depend on whether COVID, if we can actually get rid of COVID forever. And that is possible, but right now, I don't see it in the near future. We have been able to eradicate diseases through vaccinations. So for example, smallpox is available only in laboratories. We got rid of smallpox through vaccinations. But right now, because so many people have COVID, and because so many people have COVID and have no symptoms, it's going to be hard to reduce the transmission. However, there is the belief right now that for those people who have been vaccinated, that the rate of transmission from them to others, should they contract COVID, appears to be lower than in somebody who is not vaccinated. So that's really good news, because that will sort of slow down the spread.
And speaking of spread, they're labeling the younger folks as super spreaders, and so somebody's wondering, if they're targeting the younger crowd, why aren't they targeting vaccinating the younger crowd versus right now, I believe through the city they're at 60 and then 55 through the pharmacies?
Well, that's a good question. Why not? If you want to stop speeding, you ticket the speeders, right? The real issue though is the hospitalization rate. So you want to make sure that you have enough hospital beds so we can go back to doing hip surgeries. We can go back to doing cancer surgeries sooner. So by vaccinating those people who are more likely to end up in a hospital, we're actually returning back to normal faster. Now, if we had enough vaccines to vaccinate everybody all at the same time, then we would not have any sort of rollout plan targeting various groups. The reason we have that now is to make sure that we're targeting the people who are most likely to end up in a hospital. And so there are two ways to look at that. One is to look at the people who have age as a factor, chronic diseases as another factor. And another one is to look at areas where, due to being an essential worker, the local neighborhood rate is much higher than everybody else. So that even though you're at low risk of ending up in hospital personally, more people in that neighborhood are likely to end up in the hospital. So that's why those neighborhoods are being targeted, to reduce the sort of neighborhood risk where COVID spread is much, much higher than other areas. If we were to vaccinate all the young ones, we would have a very minimal impact on hospitalization. And so our hospitals would still get overcrowded, and that would not address the problem immediately.
Thank you. Do you know if the blood tests for the antibodies for COVID are accurate? And also, how long would they stay in our system?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know how accurate they are at this time, because we are measuring antibodies, and not everybody produces exactly the same antibody to various diseases. Most people produce the same one, but not everybody. And we know that from other diseases, hepatitis, German measles, for example, and we can measure antibody levels following a vaccination, and they don't budge much, but we know through experience that the people are immune or very much protected. Typically, antibodies, there are two ways to think about antibodies, but typically you want to look at the antibodies that trigger your memory cells for the immune system the most. And so as it turns out, vaccinations with a booster shot seems to trigger that much more. And so you have longer lasting immunity. Most antibodies will go down to very low levels following 6 months or so following an infection or a vaccination. And getting a booster within that time frame in some diseases will improve things for up to 10 years. And in other conditions, up to 3 years.
Okay. Now, if you've already been sick with COVID, is there an immediate rush to get the vaccine?
The timeline would vary. That's a good question. So I wouldn't say immediate rush, but remember that your memory cells have not been very stimulated. So you're likely to lose your immunity unless you have a booster. So ideally you would get that booster within 6 months of catching COVID. And getting the vaccine does not prevent you from getting COVID. It just makes it very much less likely that you're going to fall very ill with it. So just like other things, you can catch things twice if your immune system degrades over time.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Robert. Are you familiar with the P1 variant? There's been news that it's supposedly in British Columbia. I'm not sure if it's been confirmed here in Ottawa yet. And if so, do you think we'll have to get revaccinated once they adjust the vaccines for the new variants that are not covered by our current vaccines?
I'm not familiar with the P1 variant. Let me just look it up. What I do know is that we will need a certain number of people ill with the same variant before we can sort of understand how it's different from others. So for example, we do know that the UK variant and the South African variant are far more contagious because of how it's spread and how it's taken over other countries. Right, so in the UK right now, virtually all of the cases are with the variant, and if not now, in a very short time. So let me just look up on the P1.
Just while Dr. Robert looks up that information, I just wanted to let you all know that at Greenboro, currently the province has only given Ottawa Public Health the okay to give us the AstraZeneca vaccine. If this changes, we'll definitely send out a mass email to everybody, just informing them that we have access to new ones. The likeliness of this happening is very low, though, so almost to none. We're likely only going to get the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yeah, so rather than memorize numbers, I looked it up. The P1 is the Brazilian one. So I just remember where they're coming from and which ones are of concern. So the Brazilian one is of concern. It spreads easily and it causes more severe disease. The other one that's coming but hasn't come to Canada yet is the Thailand version, which it too is also quite contagious.
Dr. Robert, could you comment on if a patient is receiving cancer therapy, so chemotherapy, what is the recommendation right now for getting a vaccine, any vaccine?
Well, that's a good question. So if people are actively getting chemotherapy for cancer, you would need to speak to the cancer specialist who's given you the treatment. There are ways to modify the treatment for the cancer that will maximize the benefit of the vaccine. And there are times where delaying the vaccine might be better overall. Also, some cancer treatments do not affect your immune system. And so it would be okay under those circumstances to consider getting vaccinations. But that would have to be through consultation with the oncologist, the cancer specialist.
Along the same line of questioning, Dr. Robert, somebody with an autoimmune disease that is not taking immunosuppressing drugs, can they still get the vaccine?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the issue here is when you have immune disorders, there is a chance that at any time you might require medications that would reduce your immune system. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not on those medications because the vaccine will not work as well. And so if you're not on those medications, now is actually the best time to get the vaccine.
What if you are on the medications?
That would depend on which ones. So as an example, there are some rheumatoid arthritis immunosuppressants that can be delayed for a week or two so that you get the maximum benefit from the vaccine and then restarted with very, very low chances of your disease flaring up. There are other medications where it might be better to get the vaccine despite the fact that the medication is blunting the vaccine response.
Is there a preference between the vaccines right now?
I don't know. We only received shipments of AstraZeneca late last week, so this is the first time we've been left with some choices. When we had only the mRNA in Ottawa, they are virtually identical. Well, no, not virtually identical, but they are such close cousins that they can actually, you can think of them as being equals. The AstraZeneca, by being a viral vector, needs to be looked at as still a family member because it's a vaccine, but a little bit differently. So this is the first time we've had choices. But the thing to keep in mind is what you're trying to do is protect yourself. Okay, and so as an example, we know with other vaccines that if you're pregnant and you get vaccinated, you're actually protecting your baby from the disease that you're worried about. We've also had a fair number of people who did not know that they were pregnant get vaccinated during the studies, and there does not seem to have been any kind of changes with the infants being born. We also know that in the context of breastfeeding, that getting vaccines will give you, the baby some of the antibodies against COVID or other vaccines through the breast milk. So you're actually protecting your child if you're breastfeeding by getting the vaccine.
And do you know why the AstraZeneca vaccine is so widely available compared to the others?
it's not that it's so widely available. We still have fewer doses from the AstraZeneca, but it does not require the refrigerator issues. So it's a lot easier to have it. So you don't need it to keep it frozen. You can keep it in your fridge at a standard fridge temperature. Not only that, when you keep it in the fridge, you can keep it for much longer than the mRNA vaccines. And that's simply because the mRNA is so fragile, right? It breaks down so easily, so quickly, that we want to make sure that people get the most effect. So because it's much more stable at regular temperatures, it's a lot easier to transport to different locations. So while it may seem to be more widely available, it's actually just easier to transport.
Thank you.
Dr. Robert, could you comment on, there's a couple of questions in regards to patients getting biologic injections for like arthritis, so causing some immune compromise like while they're getting the injection. So one is that they take a biologic and they're scheduled to get a Pfizer vaccine 3 days later. And then another that also takes a medication for psoriatic arthritis, and whether it's okay to get the vaccines and whether they should boost that vaccine at a later date with a different vaccine.
So some biologicals are okay and others are not. So that would be a question best left with whoever's prescribing it. And so again, I was mentioning that sometimes the timing of these medications can be altered a little bit so that you get a better effect from the vaccine, and others cannot. And if they cannot, then it is what it is. You won't get the same response as somebody else the same age without that medication, but you will get a response, and that will help keep you out of the hospital should you come down with COVID. Did I answer the question?
Yes, I think the main point there is that if you are on a very specific biologic medication, is to speak with your specialist about that.
And Dr. Robert, if you're scheduled to have surgery, would you advise your patient to get the vaccine before or after the surgery?
The best vaccine is the vaccine you get first. So I would not hold off on surgeries. I'll hold off on vaccinations based on other things going on in your life, which would include surgery as well.
Thank you. If you had your first dose with AstraZeneca, can you get the second dose Pfizer, Moderna, or J&J when that's available?
At this time, we don't know. So we're just saying stick with the same vaccine that you had for your first dose, but we really don't know. It's a very good question in the context of should there be a sudden shortage of vaccines in a specific, say for whatever reason, Pfizer is suddenly unavailable. What would people who had their first shot do for their booster? So right now we're just saying stick with the same one as you had, because if you had no reaction with the first one, then we know it's probably going to be the same for the second booster shot.
That's great. Do you know if hydroxychloroquine is contraindicated for the vaccine?
I don't believe so. I'll look it up. I don't believe so.
Just while Dr. Robert is looking that up, I just wanted to let you guys know for booking, once everything is ready to go at Greenboro here, I will send out a mass email, such like you got a couple of days ago, notifying you of this webinar, and it'll have all the details, when to call, who to call, and how everything will work.
Yeah, so I can't see any information about hydroxychloroquine and the coronavirus. So whoever's prescribing it, I would just ask, just to be absolutely sure. But my sense is that because I'm not picking it up right away, is that if there is some problems, they're rare. So this is again something better to sort of just ask whoever's prescribing the medication.
That's great. There was some, go ahead.
Sorry, Christy. Is there any current concern with hormone replacement therapy in the vaccine?
No concern so far. And because there's been millions of doses given in all of the vaccines, I would say no concerns at all. Okay, so I see here about disabilities. So the priority system right now is set by the provincial government. So it's different in all provinces. The issue here has to do with again, which populations are most likely to end up in hospital. There is an equity lens, and as we have more vaccines, those will become sort of easier and easier things to answer. Now, right now, people with disabilities, depending on the disability, so some disabilities may make it more likely that you end up in hospital. So for those people, they are on the priority list.
That's great. There's a question here about a patient who was infected with a variant of COVID, and she's currently in ICU in the hospital. Now, when she's done her recovery, does she need to receive both vaccines or only one?
I would hazard a guess and just say probably just the one, because she already has immunity from catching COVID. And let me just say, I'm sorry that she's so ill. So she'll probably just need a booster shot. If she's really fearful, I don't think people would decline a second shot, provided we have adequate supply of vaccines.
And there was an article that was released by NACI on March 29th, recommending that provinces pause the use of AstraZeneca to those under the age of 55. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so that was based on that clotting issue that I mentioned. And I think that people are just being very, very cautious. And we have the luxury of choice. So in the UK, for example, they have less choice. And so they continue to use AstraZeneca, keeping in mind that the chances of dying from COVID are in the hundreds to 200 times more likely than to have that rare side effect.
Dr. Robert, can you comment on the interval of dosing? So just your thoughts about it going from the initial recommendation of 3 weeks to now 4 months, and the reasoning for that.
Absolutely. Let me just go back to my slide. And so that's a very good question. The issue here has to do with vaccine availability. And so what we do know with the vaccines, and this is what we see in many illnesses as well, is that after 10 to 14 days, you get a lot of protection. Okay. And notice just how flat the line is with respect to getting more infections. Okay, it's very flat. Now, we don't know how flat it is if you did not get your second dose. We do not know that. Okay. But even if it were lower than if you had no vaccine, then we are better off. And so the way I would like to sort of explain it is, imagine that if you had one shot, you were 75% protected. and I'm making these numbers up, okay? And if you had both shots, you were 100% protected from landing in the hospital, okay? And so now I'm looking at my mom and my dad, and I'm sort of saying, should I give my mom both shots so she never ends up in hospital, but my dad, if he gets COVID, will end up in hospital or has zero protection? Or would I prefer that each gets 75% protection? And so when you apply that to a whole population, you'll find that you can end up having a lower hospitalization rate with the vaccines available. And the only reason this is being thought about is because we don't have the manpower nor the vaccine quantities to vaccinate everybody as it was studied during the trials. Keep in mind that if you're making a vaccine and you're a pharmaceutical company, you want to make sure that you have a good product, and your interval is 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you would have to sort of spend a lot of time, and it would not be released earlier if you had to sort of see, well, can we actually wait 4 months before you get your second dose? So yes, it feels like we're experimenting. At the same time, what we know from other vaccines is that anywhere between 4 and 6 months following your first vaccine is a good time for boosters. Now, we see that with the shingles vaccine, for example, anytime between 2 and 6 months following your first shot to get a very nice booster. We see that with some of the hepatitis vaccines. So it's not, so the vaccine technology is not new. COVID is new. And so we're applying what we know from other diseases and hoping that it applies to COVID. It does have a good chance to, because that's how our bodies react to infections.
That's great. I wanted to address, there were some questions that were submitted prior to this webinar. So for those that may be on here that have asked them, what factors will influence our priority of vaccinations for our patients? And in line with that, what timeline protocol will be followed in relation to the gap between the 2 shots? So the factors that will be considered are along with the city clinics. So Ottawa Public Health, we're following the same phase sequence, age and the essential workers right now, and the timeline will follow the same suit. So we've been told to immunize after 4 months for the second dose. However, if that does change, we will let you know via email. But that will be all dependent on the inventory that the province has and what they're able to give Ottawa Public Health, and in turn what Ottawa Public Health can give to us.
So thank you all. And the reason for having this session is just so we can have a lot of questions answered all at once, right? So I see that we have over 90 people. So, thank you, because now I know that there's 90 people who won't be phoning in asking about questions. I think, Christy, you mentioned that this would be available, right?
Absolutely. It's currently being recorded, and shortly after this presentation will be emailed to all of Greenboro. Everybody will be able to watch it. So as mentioned in the beginning, please feel free to share the link with anybody. They do not have to be a patient of the Greenboro Family Medicine Center to watch this presentation. But yes, please feel free to share it. So it looks like there's lots of thank yous. We're very happy to provide this for you guys. Thank you to Dr. Robert for being able to attend and provide lots of information for our patients, and for Aaron as well, who has joined, and a little bit of background administrative work too. We thank all the patients that have been able to join, and if there is more of these, we'll certainly let you guys know. So without further ado, this ends our session, and everybody stay safe out there and look out for your emails. We will be in touch once we are ready to open up the booking for you guys.
Oh, is everybody still there?
We are.
Yeah, so I suspect that many of you are already booking in multiple places in order to get your vaccine as soon as possible. Please remember to unbook yourself so that other people have the same opportunity. And we have a shortage of vaccines, but at the same time, we're finding ways to get it in people's arms. And you have to remember that it's not the vaccines that will help, it's getting the vaccine in your arm that will help. And so we want to make sure that everybody else also has access should you have multiple bookings done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robert. There was a question here whether or not the attendees are already registered. You're not registered per se, but once you receive the email letting you know that Greenboro is up and running for clinics, it'll tell you in the email how to book your appointment, how to register with us for your shot. And just to be clear that Greenboro right now is only focused on immunizing patients of our medical center. Unfortunately, we've not been given the okay to immunize the general public. All right, well, that about sums everything up for us. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. We look forward to doing this again for you. Again, thank you to Dr. Robert and to Erin and all the background administrative work that is going into this. Yeah.
Sorry, just before everybody goes, there's been a couple of questions just about this of people who had their first doses, got them in Kingston or were part of a pilot project somewhere. And so they're not scheduled for any second doses yet anywhere. I just wanted to see if you could address that really quickly. I think probably you just have to wait until basically really your 4-month mark, and then likely more spots will be open, but Christy might know more.
No, you're absolutely right, Erin. Right now, public health and the province is asking us to immunize people who have not been immunized yet. What I would recommend for those who have received their first dose and do not have a second appointment set up, please contact Ottawa Public Health. You can go onto their website. They have an amazing, amazing list of information and contacts for you guys, just to see how you would go about booking your second dose. Should that change at Greenboro, we'll certainly let you know via email. For those that may have been invited or the link has been sent to you by somebody and you realize that your email is not on file at the office, please do call in and just to provide your email as we will be increasing our notifications via email.
I'm going the wrong way. I'm looking for that public health slide that I had.
I think it was just at you had it in the end, I think.
I know.
It's the second last slide to the end.
There we go.
So just go Ottawa Public Health or OPH and then COVID-19, and they have tons of information. And for those of you who really want sort of the scientific information, if I can direct you to the Center for Effective Practice, or CEP for short. And they have a whole section with the scientific background on everything COVID related and other conditions too.
That's great. Well, without further ado, anybody else have any questions, comments from the panelists? Okay, and we don't, looks like we don't have any more further questions from everybody that's attending right now. So we will go ahead there. We'll go ahead and end this. And thank you again, everybody, for joining. Again, thank you, Dr. Robert, Erin, and everybody in the background here with the administrative work, working tirelessly answering your questions here via the chat. And we look forward to presenting to you guys again.